everybody. Welcome back to Fire Apparatus Emergency Equipment. My name is Nick Wilbur. This is the Apparatus Workshop. We got a great episode today. We're going to talk tiller trucks, and this is part 3. We're going to really dive in today with the spec part. We're going to talk about training. We're going to talk about kind of everything else there is that we haven't covered so far, and maybe go back and cover some of the material again. This is going to be kind of the culmination of all the tiller truck conversation. Obviously myself, Nick Wilbur, and Win Slauch as normal. And we have a very special guest today, and we can't talk tiller trucks without bringing in Steve. And so I will have Steve kind of give his rundown of his vast experience in tiller trucks. And we'll hopefully have a good show today. Steve?
Well, thank you, Nick. Win, thanks, guys, for having me on. I think it's always good when I have an opportunity to talk about tillers. This discipline is so much fun. I always consider myself an apparatus nerd. I'll talk your ears off when it comes to this. So unique in that aspect. I've got 30 years background in the fire service, 26 of those years with Seattle Fire Department. I'm currently retired. In Seattle, we've always had tillers and always in the downtown core. And then in about 2007, our department decided to make a decision to transition all of our outline stations that had rear mount sticks to tillers. And so that took about 10 years for that process to happen. So a lot occurred in that time frame. And my involvement in TDAs kind of came back to when I was taught how to drive in tiller. And it was a typical way, we're taught in the National Fire Service, you go out to an open space and they run you around. And when they think that you're good to go, they take you out on the street. And I just remember how nervous I was and how unprepared, and I really didn't know what the heck I was doing. And hairs on the back of my neck were standing up. And but I'm a firefighter, so I'm going to fake it until I make it, right? But I just remember I just didn't know what I was doing. And I would come back and I would talk to people who I really respected and ask lots of questions. And it was just interesting to see different variations of how people view driving or tillering. And that's totally interesting, too, when you think about in the National Fire Service, there is currently today no national standard on how you drive or tiller these, which is crazy because they've been around for more than 100 years. And depending on where you are in the country, you can have very, very strong opinions, differences on how somebody would drive and tiller. And so it kind of got me going down this journey of I wanted to understand what that driver's doing and then what is that tiller operator doing and how do they work together to make this rig, get down the road consistently. And so about 17 years ago is kind of when I started that journey. And it's been a blast going through that process where we've built a formalized process to help departments in their journey, kind of onboarding a new tiller as they kind of come into the National Fire Service. Because historically, these rigs in the late 70s, early 80s, we started to see them go away from the fire service. And that was basically based on staffing shortages that you had in the National Fire Service. And then really only the big cities had these apparatus. And I would kind of harken back to the history of the tiller. It goes all the way back to our original truck companies where Daniel Hayes built the first one. And so we all kind of all truck companies come from the tiller apparatus, but they just started fading out of the National Fire Service. And so about 17 years ago-ish, you started to see a resurgence come back into the National Fire Service. And specifically, small departments now were looking at TDAs where they never would have looked at them before. And that's based off a whole different variations we'll kind of talk about. But I wanted to really build a clear, defined role for the driver and the tiller operator with defined definitions, terms, concepts, and then the standardization. And that's what we set out to do. And so now it's a blast being able to help departments, whether it's with the stacking of this apparatus, because they're so unique, or the actual delivery of the apparatus, and then getting them to the point where they can be very successful in driving this rig. Because this rig, if you don't drive it with both people understanding their roles, it can get really wonky. The biggest thing you want to do with this apparatus is make sure this rig is very consistent with both drivers. And when you have departments that have different philosophies within their own department, you'll have A shift driving completely different than Charlie shift, right? So the problem is somebody over on A shift jumps over to cover a shift on C shift. all of a sudden you've got two people opposing each other, and that's when the rig gets wonky. So we want all the shifts to be on board with the same standardization that we teach. And the biggest thing is get them to actually buy into this. Like that firefighter's like, why would I choose to drive or tiller this way? Oh, there's a value system here that I adhere to because I see benefits to that. And that's where we've been really successful. People really enjoy that. So I eventually built tractordrawnaerial.com, which is a website. And it was a place because back then there really was nothing on the internet about TDAs. Like the only time you would learn about that is if you went to some city who had the TDA. That's the only time you'd hear. Otherwise, it was kind of this foreign thing that a kid you remember thinking, oh, those things are cool, the hook and ladder. So I wanted to build a place where we could kind of celebrate them, be excited about them, pictures, videos, but also because departments were starting this process of getting into the tiller world and they've never spec'd it before. I wanted to have a place where people could learn about that. So you can go to my website, tons of information, totally free, to really start to gain an understanding of the foundation as you're preparing to spec that. Eventually, Facebook, Instagram comes along, social media today. So now we have Tractor Draw and Arrow on both those platforms where I can put out my own content or people can send me content and we can just, like I said, celebrate. It's so fun when I go to apartments and people are like, oh, I remember that video, and we could talk about it, and they're excited about their rig and what their rig's going to do. I also started a company called Response Training Group right there. And basically it's my training company where we go do all the training. So Response Training Group is basically over Tractor Draw and Arrow, where Tractor Draw and Arrow is just fun. Let's learn about it. Let's be excited about it. And Response Training Group is the actual training company that we do all of our training through. So yeah, now I'm retired and this is what I do full time, if you could call it full time, I guess. Hang out with guys like you, and it's super fun. So glad to be here.
Awesome. Yeah, I mean, I think there's so much information that you can learn about tiller trucks, and there's really no other place besides kind of your website and other, going to people that have them now to find that information. And having any other fire truck doesn't really get you any leg up when you're going to look at tiller trucks. So, kick this thing off. I think I'll throw the question to you first, and Wynn can kind of jump in whenever. But what makes a tiller truck in your mind different to specify? Like, what are we've never specified a tiller truck before. What are things that you would get, maybe a piece of paper, different parts of it, or different components on a tiller truck that you wouldn't see in any other fire truck out there?
That's such a huge question. We could be here for hours. Yeah, I'll stay kind of 50,000 view, but because this apparatus obviously has two drivers, that makes it so unique. Two steering wheels, and so and what people don't realize is they always think of the back of the rig as where all the magic happens, and really it's the fifth wheel. The fifth wheel is where this rig bends. This is referred to as the bendy straw apparatus of the National Fire Service. And because it bends in the middle, there's so much we can do with that. And then at the back, you have this person that can take the back of the trailer and steer it away from stuff on the inside. So as I go around the corner, I've got some pole, obstacle, car, fence. Now that tiller operator can steer that back of that trailer away from that obstacle. And because we bend in the middle and we're so long, we can really take advantage of that. But to your question, I think of this apparatus in three parts: tractor, trailer, and tiller cab. And within each of those, there's so much that goes into that. Now, this rig is very unique because it's going to have things on it that other apparatus simply do not have. Like it's going to have a buzzer system on it, right? So if you think about buzzer systems, they existed on all of our apparatus in the National Fire Service when we used to truly ride tailboard. That is when a firefighter would jump on the back, strap in, and go. Well, the only way you would let the driver know that you were ready to go is you would buzz on the back of that rig. And I remember in my volunteer days, I got the opportunity to do that. It was super fun, although I'm 6'5", so I was like a giraffe on the back of an apparatus. Hose bed. But the only other apparatus that I know of where the buzzer system still exists is in our heavy rescue walkthroughs, right? So the firefighters in there and they're going to buzz that. But the tiller apparatus, if our comms go down, potentially, you've got this system that's a redundant system that be able to talk with that driver tiller operator. Also, when you think about the unique aspects of this apparatus, it's going to have a jackknife alarm on it, right? Because this rig can jackknife. The trailer and the tractor can kiss each other, which you don't want that to happen, but at certain angles. So it's got a jackknife alarm on it, where a tractor trailer over the road does not have a jackknife alarm. Now, the question would be, why is that? Well, the answer is, on a tractor trailer, those back tires on that trailer are fixed and are not going to move. Where with a tiller apparatus, that tiller operator can move those tiller tires, and he can steer the trailer into the tractor as it's going around a corner. Now, you don't want to do that, obviously, but if for some reason they did that, that warning device is going to come on and indicate that as well. Also, you have things like a rudder gauge. So on the back of the tiller, or in the tiller cab, you're going to have a little gauge that's going to indicate the wheels of your tiller wheels, the orientation of your tiller wheels. It's just different. You don't have it on any other apparatus. They're not very accurate. They often are uncalibrated. They don't tell you real time typically of that, but it's a unique tool that doesn't exist on any other apparatus. And again, I could go on. There's so many other aspects, but those are just kind of the highlights of what makes it so different, because you've got this tractor, which essentially can be an engine, and then this long trailer, and then this compartment where this other driver, the tillerman, sits in and steers.
I like that. So I basically have 3 questions broken down almost the same way. A tractor question, a trailer question, and a tiller cab question, because again, like you said, they're kind of 3 different points. So when we're getting ready to design this thing, what are things that I can do on a tractor that either benefit me at designing a tiller, or can hamper my ability to position, drive, maneuver? I'm thinking things like wheelbase changes, tandem axles, things like that. What things, do those little things? I'm going to go with a larger cab, or I'm going to go with an independent front suspension, which on certain manufacturers extends things. Again, that tandem axle, how does that on the tractor affect the rest of the tiller?
Yeah, great question. And we can talk. Let me set the dual axle aside for a second. I'll come back to that. First thing I'd say is, when you're talking about a TDA, it is so important to understand what the manufacturer is going to build you. Like, I am surprised at the differences in the manufacturers. One of the benefits for me going around the country is I get to deal with all manufacturers. I've literally driven and tillered every manufacturer's out there currently, and the old ones. And some are, well, I'll just say this. There are a lot of differences, and you really need to understand the questions to ask the manufacturer, because it's going to drive your decisions or the lack of decisions you can have, right? Everybody's customized. Every manufacturer says they're customized, but it's like, are they really? And you need to know the questions to ask to determine if that's true or not. And that can really dictate, okay, I want to go with this manufacturer or not. And let's just understand it. Some people just love certain manufacturers, so they're just going to go with the manufacturer they're used to and they love. But there are a lot of differences that, like, for me, my experience here, I know some certain questions. So like when I start talking to the departments, I start asking them questions, and it clearly allows me to go, okay, just be aware that manufacturer is not going to allow you to do that, or that's not going to be an option. For you guys in Arlington, super excited about the spec you guys have built so far. Like, I've seen it. Oh, it's a beautiful spec, just because of what you're building and the option of that process. But when we talk about the tractor, the biggest thing you can do to help yourself is to protect the space between the front and back axle on that tractor. This is where maneuverability really begins in this apparatus. And yes, we get maneuverability from the back of that trailer, from that tillerman. But we want to make it as short as possible between those 2 wheels. And let's just talk about that for a second. Sometimes we can't do that because we've got to put a pump on it, right? So a department says, hey, I've got to have a pump on this, and that's okay. That's just what they need to do based on how they run, right? They're going to be a single apparatus in a station, so they've got to be running as a truck and a pump. This rig is still incredibly maneuverable when it has a pump on it. It's just, how do we make sure that pump doesn't go crazy, right? So like, certain manufacturers have certain pumps that say, hey, when we're choosing pumps, don't choose that one because it's going to literally make that space bigger. do you need an ISO rating for your pump? If you need an ISO rating for your pump, now that means you're going to have a larger pump panel. You're going to have more inlets, more discharges. You are now going to have required to have at least 300 gallons of water to support that. And that's another one, just the water tank itself. It should, as much as possible, sit over the pump if you can. Some manufacturers put it forward of that, and that's going to potentially make it wider. So we want to look at being customization in that regard. And then if you're on the ISO rating, now all of a sudden I need to have a certain amount of feet of hose. I've got to have certain LDH. That's going to affect my trailer because I got to put it on my trailer. So all of a sudden that ISO rating changes those parameters. And again, I'm not saying it's bad. I'm just saying know that, understand that. That's what you're building. It's okay. This rig will still be maneuverable, but when, to your point, if I'm not regulated to the ISO standard, but I still need fire suppression, then let's make a smaller pump panel, less discharges, less inlets. Let's get it to 30 inches, which again, got to ask that manufacturer, can they do that, right? So those are the things you're asking those questions. And that changes quite a bit. And then let's say, okay, I want suppression, but I don't necessarily need a pump. Well, now we can get creative and we can go to a CAF system or a CO system and put it in the trailer. Again, protecting the overall length of that tractor. Huge. So we can get creative as we start to understand the needs of the fire department and what they're doing or not doing. And let's just say, for example, I've got to have a pump on there. Well, do not put another compartment on the tractor, right? And people will be like, well, I want my engineer to get off. His gears can be right there. And I go, I get that. I know that's a want. So there's a value there. So I always say, hey, it's a cause and effect. But we've just now put a pump on your tractor, which has extended that length between the front and back axle. If we put another compartment on there, now all of a sudden we're really making this big, and you can put that compartment on the trailer and you're talking 20 more feet to walk to get to what you need to do. So you're giving up that ability for that driver to get right out to the tractor compartment, running another 15 feet down to get to the compartment. It's not a big give up for that situation. But I cannot tell you how many times I see somebody put another compartment on top of the pump, which I'm like, now you've just built an engine that's got a trailer that's going to be pulling it, right? So those are questions I like to have around those situations. But let's say, for example, you don't have to have a pump on there. Now, you will always have typically a compartment on the tractor because there is a certain amount of space that the fifth wheel needs to be able to maneuver within that tractor as it makes its turns, right? There is clearance it has to have so that there's space between the back of the tractor and that turntable that's going to require space just so it can maneuver. So typically you're going to have a compartment there, but that compartment a lot of times will be eaten up by a hydraulic tank that's directly behind the tractor cab. And so you maybe get a partial through all the way through, but you're only going to get 12 inches depth there. Not a big deal. You can still have stuff there. But what I will see in that situation is that they'll add another compartment. And I'm like, you guys just added a pump to your tractor, right? Like, let's not put that there. If you don't have to have a pump there, protect that space. So to that question, protecting that space is very, very important. But if you have to have a pump, then you look at these different variations. And if you have to have the ISO rating, let's look at different creative ways where we can put hose and cross lays. I mean, the cross lay will be right over there, but let's put that 300 gallons right over the pump itself. Now, to the question or the comment about the dual axles or dual screws on that tractor, in Seattle, we're unique. We'd always had single axles. And then the state of Washington changed its weight restrictions, which now changed and by the way, apparatus have not gotten smaller or lighter. It's just gotten heavier and bigger. And so now we got an extra dual. So we have to put an extra dual on our tractors. Now, that being said, what's interesting about that is in Seattle, we are topography challenged. Like, we have massive hills. We're very similar to San Francisco as far as hills, but not the same, but we have very, very steep hills. So, we had these single axle tractors and now we've got these dual axle tractors, but we started to see some benefits to it because of our response areas, the hills, right? And here's the pros and cons to it. Dual axle is going to give you obviously 2 more spring brakes, emergency brakes, right? So it's more braking, more tread on the ground, so you have more braking in that regard. It's going to allow you to lock up your wheels if one of them's spinning. So if you get in gravel or snow, rain, or basically ice, you can lock them all 4 up and they can work together, which is nice. I've seen that happen. Here's an anecdotal one, and no one would really know this unless they've been in a single axle and also been in a dual axle as far as tillering. But with a dual axle, it will take up some of the vibration for the tiller operator. So it's a smoother ride in the tiller cab. I don't know if you'd really notice that much, but I can tell you, yeah, I noticed it. But if you've never been in one or the other, you won't care, won't know. Now, all that being said, well, here's another thing. With a dual axle, your tractor got longer, right? So it's like putting a pump on there. It's like 22 inches more that you put on there, a little more than that actually. So your tractor just got bigger. And like if you're backing up, when you back up, remember your duals are under the gooseneck, the front of the trailer. So when you're backing up, the duals will kind of peek out on the back side of that backing maneuver, where with that extra screw or extra dual, it really pops out. So there's like, well, okay, I'm gonna need a guide back there, or I need to make sure I'm aware that thing's popping out, because it pops out a lot more than a single axle. So it's just, there's a characteristic change. All that to be said, I always tell this story. My driver and my tiller operator, Pat Irving and Scott Houle, who are both retired from Seattle Fire, absolutely amazing driver tiller operators. I mean, these guys were the cream of the crop, in my opinion. I've been around a lot of good driver tiller operator teams. And these guys have been driving and tillering together as a team for 20 years. So they're like one person. Like, I mean, they can interswitch and change. But Scott, my tiller operator, hopefully Scott's okay with me telling this story, but Scott, my tiller operator, really, really impressive driver, off shift, who drive pump trucks and those types of things. And he really liked the dual axle tractor. Pat, who was our regular driver, who'd been driving, they both retired with 40 years with Seattle Fire, so a long time with the department, a lot of experience. Pat was a really good driver as well. He liked the single axle. So like here you got 2 incredibly skilled people with different opinions, and that's the fire service, right? So yeah, I mean I just find it interesting, the nuances here. Single axle, dual axle. Some departments will have them. You see them in California. I think Charlottesville has one. Has a lot in Washington State. Although now you're seeing Washington State TDAs go back to the single axle because Washington State relaxed its weight restrictions. You can get a waiver now. So there's just different variations in that.
You mentioned that obviously that with the tandem axle, that as you're turning it, it sticks out farther, and that the truck gets about, I think you said 22 inches bigger. But when you do that, does the wheelbase actually get smaller because the forward axle gets pushed up? I mean, I know on a rescue squad, if you go normally from a single to a tandem, we're going to shorten that wheelbase a little bit. So does that affect the same on a tiller?
It doesn't, because again, it's kind of like the only thing that would change there is the compartment behind the tractor itself. Not compartment, the crew quarters. You can put a 10-inch extension on the crew quarter where the number 3, number 4 firefighter is going to be. And so if you got rid of that, that's the only thing that's changed, because you're still dealing with between the back of the tractor to the turntable and then the hydraulic tank. So there's still that. And
you need the space for the fifth wheel, like you said.
Yeah, absolutely. Right. And then what people don't realize too, the pivot point on any apparatus is the back dual of any apparatus. It's the middle, of the tire. And so that now goes to the back dual of the tractor for that second dual. And so, yeah, great question, but no.
Okay. So again, moving back, not only on, kind of back to the trailer now, not only do you have the one wheelbase you have to deal with, but you have 2 wheelbases, the overall wheelbase of the apparatus kind of. So how does me extending the trailer by adding extra compartments, a waterway, things like that, how does that affect the overall maneuverability of that apparatus, even though it still bends in the middle?
Yeah. Well, okay. So if you tiller behind a 55-foot apparatus, or a 56-foot, or a 58, or a 60, or a 62, those are typically your sizes, you will notice a dramatic difference in regards to driving it and tillering it. A shorter tiller, the trailer almost gets dragged more through the corner, where the longer one bends around it more. And it's just like, it's not like it's getting dragged because you're still turning. It just feels that way. And for someone who's driven and tillering all of these, when I get in a short one, I'm like, well, this thing's like a sports car. And it feels like the pivot on the trailer is going to pivot sooner. And my back tiller wheel is going to get closer to the back of, my back tiller wheel is going to get closer to the corner, the apex of the corner, the actual highest point of the corner, where if you have a longer trailer, the trailer is going to actually hover over the corner as the tiller kicks out around it. So just interesting. I mean, it's kind of funky when you get in them, but I think, one of the things you want to do is you want to build a tiller that's not going to be any longer than 60 feet. That's typically the breakover where you really want to keep it under 60 feet. 60 feet is very maneuverable. And then as you go to 58, I love 58 because it's the best of both worlds, where you still get a lot of compartmentation and it's more maneuverable than 60. And when I say more, hard for me to quantify right here talking about it, but if I were to take you out, I could show you what that is. It's just going to move around the corner just cleaner is really what's going to happen there. Maybe a little quicker because less obstacles. Now, when you get down to 56, 55, that's like a whole different ballgame. Especially as a driver, if I'm driving that and we just use the mirrors to the nth degree. I mean, that is king on a tiller. The mirror is everything. And the type of mirror you select is everything. And so when I am looking at that, I'm used to looking at the turning point of that corner and where the pivot occurs on the trailer and when it bends around the corner. So when I'm in a 55-foot tiller, it comes so much sooner because it's coming at the tiller wheel. And that looks weird. It's just almost an optical illusion point because I'm so used to like a 58 or 60, typically 60. And ours in Seattle were 59-11 because of that dual axle. Yeah, it is significant when you think about that. And some of those decisions, like you said, if I'm getting a 55-foot tiller, decisions are already made for me. That is, I cannot get a pump on that. You cannot put a pump on that if it's 55. I'm not putting a pre-plumb waterway on that. And departments have to, that, you want to start a fight at the kitchen table, ask people if they want a pre-plumb waterway or not, right? People will go crazy. And I love that conversation. I love debating it and really understanding other people's views, but also sharing my view on that. And but my point to that is if you're at 55, you're not getting a pre-plumb waterway. And that's simply because the size of your aerial, the overall length of your bed section is already set, it's preset. And so if I have a pre-plumb waterway on that, my fly section upper mid has to stick out about 3 to 2.5 feet to accommodate that cradle and all that stuff that's under the aerial. So if you're at 55 feet and you get rid of the pre-plumb waterway, the fly section upper mid gets to suck all the way into the base section of that aerial. And so now my tiller cab is now moved right up next to that, behind that. And also, I would say too, with some of the advances in aerial advances as far as length, 107s, 105s, 102s, typically you're going to lose that and go back to 100 foot or 101 foot, and you'll have a little stubby egress section on that because if you want 55 feet, that's what you're getting. Now, some people need 55 feet because their fire station dictates that, right? That's what it is. And so I was dealing with a fire department, very large fire department, who needs to build a 55.6 tiller. And, it was disheartening because I was like, okay. And they were okay with not having a pump. I was like, okay, you can't have a waterway. I was like, well, we got to have a waterway. I was like, well, you can't. And so, you have to make that decision. Are you going to get the tiller or not waterway? So that was a big hurdle for them to try to decide and a big thing for them to wrap their brain around as well. So it's kind of fun when you start to think about, okay, what does my overall size get me and how does it start to make decisions for me? It starts to dictate decisions. And so if you're at 60 feet, you got the best of all worlds. I think 56.11, I think, or 57.11. I think it's 57.11 is the shortest tiller I've seen with a pre-plumb waterway. And there may be something else out there, but just in my experience, 57.11 is what I've seen with a pre-plumbed waterway. That's the shortest I've seen. And again, there could be something out there that I've not seen. But to your question, that becomes a very important part of like how I'm going to make these decisions or not.
I think the greatest part that we talk about is that pre-pipe waterway. We've talked about it with, rear mounts versus mid mounts versus towers versus straight six. We've had, some aerial conversations before, and, you don't really see any tower ladders out there without a pre-pipe waterway. I think I could, I look at the tiller trucks the same way on the opposite side. Like, not having that pre-pipe waterway can give you a lot of benefits to it. So it's, it's definitely a serious conversation to have. I think, for us at College Park, I've told this story on this podcast before, but we went down the road, even on a rear mounted truck, like, oh yeah, we're going to get a pre-pipe waterway. Why? Well, because we always had one. Well, how many times are we actually using it? What are we using it? How many times is it getting away? Right. So I think for a tiller truck, you really have to sit down and have those conversations like you're talking about and really make those decisions.
Yeah, don't get me wrong. I mean, don't get me wrong. I would say that most TDAs, I would say 95% of new TDAs built have pre-plumbed waterways on them. I mean, almost all of them. I'm just very excited when I see one that doesn't have one. And for someone who will operate an aerial with a pre-plumbed waterway and without one, I would say it's just the freedom of not having all that stuff under the aerial and what I can do with it. So, I just want to be clear. Most TDAs have pre-plumbed waterways. Almost all of them do. And like I said, I would say we do, I would say 85% of our training is done with brand new departments who have never had one before, that we're coming in and providing this formalized program. And then, there's 15% of the departments that will bring us out that have had TDAs forever. And there's reasons that they'll bring us out, and it's super fun to work with them as well, because we're not necessarily teaching them how to drive and tiller. We're teaching them how to drive and tiller to our standard and formalizing that process for their people. But it's just interesting because most departments getting TDAs are smaller jurisdiction. I mean, I'm talking 100 firefighters or less. Or 200. That's the majority of people getting TDAs now because, and I'm sure you'll ask this question, but when you're talking about getting a TDA, what it can do now is you can take 3 apparatus and literally combine them into one. And when you're talking about a smaller jurisdiction where you need to save money, or your taxpayers are asking for you to really be fiscal with your apparatus, you can take this truck company or this TDA and put a pump on it. So now it's an engine. You put your truck equipment on there, and then you can take your rescue equipment and put it on this rig because of the sheer size of that trailer. And so you literally can get 3 apparatus into one and really maximize. I was working with a department in Texas where their heavy rescue, I don't know, we call it heavy rescue, but it was a rescue. It was more of a bread truck, if you will, type apparatus. But it was at the firehouse. And their straight frame, when they got a heavy rescue, they'd have to respond back, pick up the heavy rescue, and they would go out together. And so when we built the tiller with them, it was being able to combine every piece of equipment on that heavy rescue went on the tiller. And now, as that tiller drove around, it was their heavy rescue combined with their truck company, and they never had to go back to the station. So the freedom of that and saved cost. I'm not having to buy 3 apparatus or 2 apparatus or whatever you're doing. You can be really creative with that. And that's another real benefit to the TDA that people don't recognize, especially for these smaller jurisdictions, which is really cool to see them be able to do just that.
Yeah, and I think, we do, as part of what we do some fleet evaluations and really a needs assessment for aerials. And as we're driving around, what we find is that even in these small communities is that they're unable to provide the ground ladder complement that is needed for their area on a standard or traditional truck. So even though they might have and been in a rear mount aerial for a very long time and quite potentially don't even have the staffing to it, what we see leads us to say, hey, listen, if you really want to do this properly, you need to provide this many ground ladders. And the TDA ends up being one of the only ways to really accomplish that.
Well, I always say that this apparatus is very modular in the way that you're going to build it. So I always like to ask the questions, in regards to when I'm working with the department. As I start to and when I'm working with a department, my goal is literally to try to help them build the best rig that they can build that has helped them to be the most operationally ready that they can be. And so that requires me to ask lots of questions to find out, well, why are you getting this apparatus? What's the purpose? What's the intent behind that? And then as I start to drill down in more questions, some of the stuff becomes very obvious, the direction we're going to go, or they have to go based off of the way they deploy. And my goal too is to educate them, like literally educate them on the decisions they're making. So I always say, like, a lot of decisions you're going to make on the TDA has a cause and effect. This decision over here is going to affect another part of the apparatus, and you need to understand that so that when someone challenges you, I'm like, why'd you do that? Well, because we wanted this over here. So this value system was greater than this value system. And now I'm educated as to why I can explain that and articulate that to anybody who's asking that. So as I'm working with departments, I really work strong on trying to understand the why behind what they're doing. And then as we work through it, hopefully I've transferred the information from me to them to where they really understand, hey, we built a strong truck here for these reasons. So, I'm going to ask, hey, do you need a pump? Do you not need a pump? Do you need the pre-pump waterway or not? Is this going to be a truck, tiller, a combination of things? How are you going to staff this? How many people are going to be in the truck? Where are certain things? Like you think about the tiller operator getting out of the tiller cab. That's an interesting thing because now times you will see sometimes people don't put 2 stairs up to the tiller cab. And I'm a big fan of that, only if you're doing it for the right reasons. And what I mean by that is, okay, if you're not putting stairs on the one side, what are you doing on the other side? Well, we want a big ground ladder, a long ground ladder. Awesome. We're going to bring the compartments all the way back, and that ground ladder will go all the way back to the back ass end of my trailer. Awesome. That's great, right? I literally don't need to get out on both sides. It's just convenience. So then the question is like, well, what side do I want the stairs to be on? And I always get the question or the answer like, oh, I want to be on the curb side. I was like, well, 50% of the time, the driver's not on the curb side. So what I always say is, when you think about that, think about 2 drivers coming to the apparatus. And if both drivers enter on the same side and they exit the same side, they're always able to communicate to each other as they're doing that. And there's a ton of information that is transferred in those types of situations. So like I was an officer before I retired. So on the truck, me and what we called number 3 is the firefighter behind me. We had 4-person staffing. And so me and that person's getting out and we're potentially ready to go into the fire, right? We're going to get absorbed in, go for rescue, search, whatever it is. And my driver and tiller operator still need to get bunked, right? Get their packs on, and they've got other tasks. So generally, as I'm coming to the scene or we're heading to the scene, I have a general understanding of what we're going to do based on what the report is, or someone's on scene giving me an assignment or something. But as I pull up to the scene, as I get out and I'm getting everything strapped on, ready to go, I'm taking in the fire scene, and something might change, right? The scene may dictate a different tactic that we may do, and I need to communicate that with my driver. And so as me and number 3 are heading, I'm going to walk around the front of that tractor, and I'm just going to yell to Pat, hey, Pat, you guys are outside, or Pat, you guys are doing this, or now you're vertical vent, whatever it is, or you guys, I want all 4 of us inside. We'll go to floor 2, you go to floor 1, whatever it is, whatever the scenario is. But the beauty of that is now Pat and my tiller operator, Scott, at the time are right there together. And now they start to talk about what equipment they're going to get, depending on how things change or whatever it is. So sometimes you might think about just these simple decisions of like, okay, I want my stairs on both sides so they're going to enter and exit. Or I love the tiller compartment on the back of the trailer. Pros and cons to that though, right? If I have a tiller compartment on the back of my trailer, that sometimes will make the ass end of the trailer fatter. And I don't like that. I want it to be tapered in if I can, right? There's decisions why I can and can't. Typically that compartment is going to be a full height. If I have a very strong ladder compartment in my ladder tunnel, it's only going to be about 12 inches compartment. So I'm going to want it full height more than likely. It's a great tiller compartment because they get out and boom, their gear's right there. Sometimes you might think about, what if I put that compartment in the middle of the trailer so both driver and tiller operator met right there to bunk up? So they're right there, they're not yelling to each other. And I'm not saying do this, I'm saying these are things we talk about based on different things you want on this rig, based on compartmentation, where equipment's going to go, those things. And to your latter question, I think that was what you initially said, and I went off on a squirrel's trail. Sorry about that. I'm realizing I just did that. That's the nerd in me. Sorry. But the TDA has such an opportunity to truly bring a lot of wood or metal to the fire scene. Like it really does because of its overall size. And so and when I talk about this rig being modular, that's where you could say, okay, we want to bring a lot of ground ladders to the scene, and this truck's going to do that. And you can go crazy, or you can put a lot in there. I mean, Easton Fire, I mean, the Pennsylvania, what their ground ladder, what's on there, that's a lot of ladders. I mean, that means, and it tells people something at the fire ground, right? Like, hey, when I get to the fire ground, these things are coming off the truck and they're being set up against this building. And I can be quick and efficient with it based on where it's at. It's going to be at shoulder length. It's not up high or I don't have to bring something down off the engine. Boom, I can grab it right there at shoulder length or waist length, and I'm off. And if it's on both sides of the apparatus, I got my 16, my 24, 35, whatever you want to put on there. But I got two on both sides, right? I can think of Richmond, Virginia. They really built a ladder truck, and it had exterior ladders on both sides. It had exterior ladders up on top of the aerial. It had some secondary, what I call secondary ladders, sitting up on top of the deck of the trailer. And then inside the tunnel, it was just full of metal. 370 feet of ground ladders they're bringing to the fire ground. Like, that's dramatic, and that's amazing. And because of the overall length and how you can be very creative. Like, I'm always like, dude, don't put a little giant in your ladder tunnel. Do not waste ladder tunnel space. That's valuable space. Oh my gosh. But there's so much space on top of the trailer that we could put like a little giant or our Fresno ladder or our attic ladder. Like, there's so much space up there. That's a secondary device. It's not like a need it immediately kind of thing. Your VES ladders, that can go under your gooseneck, under your turntable, because it's so flat and it's a little higher, it's more shoulder length, but firefighters can still get to it. But there's a lot of hidden spaces on this apparatus that what I consider, and I always talk about easy access. That as I jump off this apparatus with the TDA, when I open those doors, guess what? All of my equipment is at my chest to waist height, right? Where my straight frame rear mounts or my straight frames, typically I may have to go up high. I may have to open up the compartment, pull out equipment to get to pull my equipment. So the ergonomics of a TDA and the way we construct it or spec it really plays into the overall health of my body and the longevity of me as a firefighter. Or just to get to my tools, right? My irons, my New York hooks or something. There's so many places on exterior that you can put those that are quick, easy access to getting to those, and just help me deploy fast and easy and be efficient with my movement and be very intentional about getting in there and doing my job, whatever that task assignment is. But truly, it's a ladder truck. I mean, that's the hook and ladder for sure.
Yeah, I think there's two things you said there, and really, I guess it's one that kind of brings you to two things. But it being modular and you deciding on what you want to do with it, if you say, hey, we need to put our rescue stuff on this, well, then that might do two things. It might extend the length of the truck for you because you need the extra compartment space. And then two, it might drive you into a tandem axle, depending on how the weights of that apparatus are going to, weigh itself out. So it could put you into that heavier weight anyway. So again, you're already answering some questions just by asking questions up front about what do you want this to do? And then how is that going to affect your design process? So I think that's pretty good there.
Yeah, I just saw one. It was Henrico. We were talking about it at work the other day down in Virginia, and they were talking about putting their technical rescue stuff on their ladder truck as well as rescue stuff. Again, that drives that weight up when you start talking about trench panels or anything else. I mean, you start really getting into it. One thing I want to bring up, I think the conversation about little giants, I can't say that enough. We've said on other podcasts. Putting cribbing in the back of your ladder tunnel. There's a lot of things that don't belong in the back of the ladder tunnel. I don't think that we can say that enough. And you've kind of skirted around it. And, I feel like I have to say the way that we say on this podcast, because it comes up almost every podcast, but the mission of the vehicle is by far paramount. And, anything that we talk about, rescue engines, ladder trucks, quints, any combination vehicle, any single vehicle, like that is the first thing you need to do is sit down and find out that mission. And, it's a breath of fresh air. I know obviously you do great work with the tiller trucks. It's the same thing. What are we going to do with this thing, right? There's so much space on this, but we can go 100 different ways. Let's dive into what we want this vehicle to do and how do we want to do it. You start putting 370 feet of ladders on it. Well, now you're starting to take away where you can put rescue equipment or how much rescue equipment you can put on there, right? So there's give and takes. And I think sitting down with that piece of paper before you start cutting metal, what are we going to do this vehicle is so important. And I think for this vehicle, it's getting somebody that knows it. If it's, somebody sitting here that's done it before, that's great. If it's somebody, your neighbor, that's done it before, like have conversations, go see these vehicles, because it's a bigger vehicle. There's more space to mess up. That's the way I look at it right now, is there's so big of a vehicle that there are so many things that you can mess up without even knowing you're messing it up, not having done it before.
Well, I would say, I'm always, so when I work with departments and, I'm doing a lot of Zooming with them and helping with spec and so forth. And a lot of times it's before pre-con. And, after we get done, my goal is, okay, now you understand the intent behind what you're building and why we're doing it and why we're putting these things here. Now, get out and go see this stuff, whether you get to the factory or get into those cities that have them, go take field trips. I mean, I love the field trips. But with those field trips, I always caveat that, say, okay, listen, when some firefighter tells you about something like, oh, I love this is what I want, and they're super excited about it, and let's say you're at some city that you're impressed with, you like the city as a fire department, just because they're telling you that doesn't mean it's a good idea. So you need to, as a firefighter, ask follow-up questions. What are the pros and cons, and really start to look at, okay, they've said this, but what are the downsides to that, and ask them. If they can't tell you, or they fluff it off, then I think you need to do some more research and look into that, because I can't tell you how many times people say something that's, they think it's cool. And I, when I hear it, I'm like, okay, well, let's talk about what cool is and then what the value of that is to what they think it is. I'll give you an example. And this is rare, but this is just giving an example. I had a department was out doing field trips. And I kind of encouraged them to go, and I said, go here, go here. And so they went to this department, and they were talking to what I would consider a very seasoned tillerman. Like, this guy was really seasoned and so forth. So they asked him, hey, what would you do different with this spec? And, firefighters are always going to have their opinions with that. And he said, well, I would really like to have an air horn back here, back in the tiller cap. And so, oh, okay. And so, because, often I need to get a hold of people's attention, and I'm back here and I can't, and I'm steering my trailer into them, or they're getting in my way, which does happen. And so, so the way they perceived what he said when they spec'd their rig, they did that. But when the tillerman had an air horn button in the back of the tiller cab, but when he pushed the air horn button, it turned the air horn on in the tractor. And so you can imagine driving the rig, and all of a sudden your air horn comes on. You're like, what the hell's going on? Why is my air horn going on? And, if someone's walking by and you scare the crap out of that person walking by because the tillerman is trying to get a hold of somebody in the back, right? And that tillerman, obviously, there's some miscommunication there. He was talking about having a horn back there in the back of the tractor, which I'm not necessarily a fan of as well, because what we want people to understand is this is a tractor trailer. It simply is a tractor trailer. It just so happens you have someone in the back that augments and supports you. And we need to be very clear about that. If you are a tillerman, your job is to support and augment the driver. You are not there to do extra stuff, which guess what firefighters want to do? We're all A-type personalities. And the only tool we have back there is the steering wheel. So guess what we want to do? We want to steer, right? So we need to teach them when they steer and when they don't, and how does that help and aid the driver, and how does it affect the driver. So if we're doing anything that is outside the norm of tractor trailering, we need to be able to make sure that that's built into how we drive this rig. So if I'm back here honking an independent horn, my driver's going to think someone is honking an air horn at them, right? So that changes the dynamic here. Great idea. I understand and I love the idea, concept, but not something that I would advocate for, because we need to understand why. Why would that be bad? I just outlined it. It's a tractor trailer. We want to support that driver. We don't want to be running a horn and so forth. So I'm a big fan of people really getting out there, knowing and looking at that, but become educated on it, and then go become more educated on it. Don't just be happy because someone said something, but really understand the pros and cons to that potential decision.
So I think that's good. I think that brings us into like kind of the third part that you talked about is what can we do as we're designing this truck to increase, I guess, the visibility, or sometimes maybe if we want to treat it as a tractor trailer, what can we do that makes that operation of the Tillerman the best possible? So whether it's viewpoints, high side compartments, even again, we go back to the rake of the ladder with the waterway, things that we put on the ladder, lights on the cabs, things in the cab itself, or sunroofs, rear windows, mirrors. Like what are we looking at to, I guess, empower that driver to be the best to assist the front driver?
Yeah, there's so much to that. I mean, there is so much to that question because there's so many different variations to the things you just said. And let me just try to break it down. But the manufacturer itself, you said the rake of the aerial, different manufacturers are going to provide you with different views as a tiller operator. So like last year, I teach at FDIC every year. And the beautiful thing about being at FDIC every year is I will have departments that I've been talking to specking wise. And so the great thing is like, hey, come to FDIC, let's meet together. And now we're going to go look at all the trucks. And most of the time, all the manufacturers will have trucks out there. I know Pierce will have it. Suffin will have one this year. Generally, Seagrave does. Generally, the Rev Group, whether it be KME or Spartan, will have one out there. And the great thing about that is I can say, let's go get in each tiller cab. Now, tell me what you see. And that's the question I ask. And so they get to form their own opinions as they see different manufacturers of that, because there are some real differences regarding that. So the manufacturer is going to dictate your first sight lines because of how they build their tiller cab. That's a very important component. And there are manufacturers that make far more vast, better viewing based on how a tiller cab is designed. Then and then also the rake of the ladder. Where is the aerial and how far does it sit down? How far do I set up high? Those types of things. So those are things you can't change, but if those are important to you, go look at the different manufacturers. And I guess the reason FDIC is so great is because multiple manufacturers will be there with multiple tillers. It was great. I was helping a department and I had the chief with me, and it was awesome watching him make discoveries on his own. Right? Like it's pretty obvious to me which of these are the better view. And so he made that, I don't have to. Like, hey, let me just say, you'll figure it out. But then when we go to, okay, what can I do when I am speccing this apparatus? Well, we go to the compartmentation. And so this goes back to the pros and cons, or what are your intents? So the lower I can keep my compartments on the back side of that trailer, the better view lines I'm going to have. Now, there are always going to be blind spots for the tiller operator, simply are. And so this goes to another thing. Well, like what type of doors do we get? Like, because if I have a sliding door and if I have a 180 handle off the sliding door, that means I can lean out and get all the way down the side of the trailer to see that. That's an advantage. There are pros and cons to different doors back there and what it does to the back side of the trailer. But if I can get those compartmentation down low, then I get better sight lines. Okay, what if I want to put exterior ladders on that? Well, if I'm putting exterior ladders, I want to make sure they're sucked into the body. And now we see manufacturers putting these handles on that so my hand can get around the ladder to grab it. Well, when I've done that, I've just extended the ground ladder away from the body of the trailer, and I've just put a compartment on there, right? And I work so hard not to have that. So we want to think about those things as we're going through this process. But let's just say I've got to have high compartments because I'm going to add my rescue, or I'm going to have more truck equipment on and so forth. I've got high compartments all the way back or halfway back. Well, then we get into cameras, right? The technology can come into effect where I can place cameras, and placement of a tiller camera is so important. I cannot tell you how many bad, poor placements of tiller cameras are. So when I work with a department, we talk about, well, what are the pros and cons of where that camera goes and why would it go there and why is it bad to put it here? But we can utilize this tool to offset these high compartments if we put the camera in the right spot. But we need to make sure that we understand how we use the camera. It is only there for slow speed clearance situations. It's not there for me to be driving around the corner looking down at a camera. My eyes should be out over those tiller wheels looking at what I'm seeing as I drive around that corner. So it's for those slow speed clearance situations. If it's a clearance situation, guess what? The apparatus is going to go slow. as it goes around the corner. So it's got to creep around that corner. So if I'm going slow, guess what I have? Time. Now I can put my eyes down, and man, does it illuminate those blind spots dramatically. Again, if the camera spot's in the right spot. But that becomes a really important, give and take of what I need to do to give myself those abilities to have those good sight lines. And I've seen amazing sight lines and I've seen crappy sight lines. At the end of the day, I will say, if you have crappy sight lines, you have crappy sight lines. But if that's your only tiller, you don't know what you don't know. And you will build spatial awareness and depth perception in regards to where you are to objects. Like typically the back corner of your trailer, depending if it's fat or if it's skinny, typically a lot of times you can't see it. If you have a hinged door, you're not going to be able to stick your head out and see it. So how do you learn where it's at? Well, like in our training, we have very specific rodeos where we allow people to drive where they can make mistakes, but the mistakes they're making are the success they're going to have, because simply we need them to hit the cones and pylons to figure out where their spatial awareness and depth perception is. That is, I need to build whiskers. So when I look back here and I look at that object, I know how far I am, even though I cannot see how far I am, because I've figured out that radar, if you will, spatial awareness and depth perception through the training that we put people through to do that. But again, I always tell people like I've gone to training, I'm like, gosh, this is the crappiest sight lines I've ever seen. This is such huge compartmentation. I don't say that to the department because they've never had a tiller and they don't know what they don't know, and they will figure it out. This will be their truck. But if I'm speccing and helping them, I want to be intentional about asking these questions and seeing what their value systems are. And again, what are their intentions? Okay, we're going to need a lot of compartmentation. Okay, let's put cameras on here. There are cameras I'm absolutely against, and there are cameras I'm for. And so we got to talk about what those are and why on a tiller rig I would not have cameras in certain places, but I would on other places.
Okay. I think that there's so much more we can go into here. We are running up on an hour at this point. So I think that I think if there's anything else you want to cover, Steve, that you feel is important, yeah, let's do it now and give you that time. And
I appreciate the forum to do this. Literally we would need hours and hours to get into the weeds of this apparatus because it is so unique in the way it operates. And again, when I help departments, my goal is to spend that time with them and really get them driving towards what's the best for them based on their needs. And again, educating, because, when I take people through all the specking, there's so many, oh, I didn't even know that. Oh, I didn't even know that was a thing. Oh, okay, great. So I want them to know it's a thing, but now let's talk about why it's a thing and why you need to make a decision right now. Right, like I'm going to put blinkers on the back of my tractor. Why? Well, it's a very specific reason, and how I put the mirror or the blinkers back there really affect my overall turning radius as far as jackknifing. And it's like, what does that mean? And so we get into, I'm just throwing something out there. It shows how intricate that can get when I'm talking about putting blinkers on the back of the tractor. So I love talking about that and really helping departments build the best rig. And I always tell departments, like, listen, you cannot build the best rig. It doesn't exist, because you're giving up something for something else. And that's just the reality of it. But we can build the best thing for you, for your operations. And then I guess lastly, I'd say my passion is about helping them get up to speed on how they're going to drive this apparatus. The days of just hiring, our guy from a local fire department to come over, because that's how everybody does it. That's how it's always been done in the fire service. Or we're going to ride on the back of the tiller cab, helping that tiller operator. We have built better ways to do that. And what we have found is it reduces accidents, like legitimately. When I say accidents, I'm talking about tiller accidents. We have departments, when they drive to our standard, do not have what we consider tiller accidents because they adhere to the standardization. And remember, they're a clean slate. They have no bad habits. And that's amazing because we can come in and give them this formalized process and teach them how to drive in tiller where they own it and they have ownership of it. And they're doing it because they understand the why behind that. And we've studied for years why you would do this and why you would not do that. And through our curriculum, our videos, we were able to really clearly articulate that. And so our passion is about teaching people how to drive this, where they take ownership of it and they become really strong, and that culture gets built. We always tell them, like on day one, when we're teaching the classroom, This is your culture, day one. Whatever you do after we leave, this is going to be here for the next 5, 10, 20 years. So whatever you guys adopt and start to pursue as your driving culture starts today. And I'm always humbled to be able to be part of that process. It is super fun to still be able to be in the fire service and have, the passion and fun to do this, because this is just a cool discipline to be around. It just simply is. And to share that with departments, there's not a lot of things we got to do in the fire service or in life anymore that are one-offs. And tillering is one of those, right? Like if you think about the percentage of tillers in the National Fire Service, it's a small percentage. And so when your department gets one, you won the lottery. It's super fun and part of that. So to be able to, help them spec it and then, help them onboard it with our tiller training program, the process, the very formalized process that we come through and do, and watch them kind of take it on. It's kind of like our baby, and we're giving it to them, and now they're going to hold it up strong. That is super fun to be able to be part of that process for sure.
I have one last question. When you say you live in Texas, do you live outside of the firehouse that has the tiller truck and the hazmat tiller sitting next to each other, just so you can see that out your backyard?
Yeah, we're moved to Texas now. I live in Texas. I don't think we mentioned that, but when I retired, my wife and I moved to Texas. My son goes to school here in Texas, and now I'm more, centrally located in the country. So to get out of the Pacific Northwest and go to like Boston, that's 5 hours, right? Where now it's 3 hours. Like, oh my gosh, it blows my mind. I could 2 hours from Florida. It's crazy. Jumping up to FDIC this year is going to be a phenomenal flight. My wife wants sun, and Pacific Northwest just doesn't give you a lot of sun. So, we moved down here. It's been fun. But yes, I'm in the Metroplex area, so I'm 30 minutes outside of Dallas. I know what you're talking about. So that's really cool. And Texas is blown up with tillers. It's amazing. Yep. I think it was 2016. There was only one TDA or one department that had a TDA in all of Texas, and that was Dallas Fire Department. And now just plethora of tillers throughout the state, which is fun to see it populate.
I saw that come out, and I was like, why would they have that? And then I saw it go in service, and I was like, oh, that makes 100% sense. They have a tiller ladder truck sitting next to a tiller specialty unit. I mean, yeah.
Well, yeah. And Asheville, North Carolina has just built a KME tiller rescue. So again, it doesn't have the aerial on top of it. Portland, Oregon has one. There's one in California. Dallas has one. And now KME, it's the first KME one they've ever built, but it's and Asheville already has a tiller. So this is their second one, but it simply will not have an aerial on it. It's just compartments galore.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah.
Well, I appreciate you taking the time out to educate us and everybody else, obviously, about tiller trucks. Always like talking to you about tillers. You can just the passion bleeds out, and it's awesome to hear. For those listeners out there, if you have any questions that come up, you can reach out to me, Nick, Nick Wilbur, Wilbur at evr.solutions, and we will pass all those questions on to Steve. You can also obviously check out his website, get in touch with him there too, and just check it out to see all the cool tiller truck information. Appreciate you taking the time out of your day to listen. Appreciate you, Steve, again. Thank you. And be safe out there, guys. Oh, sorry.
Go ahead and give your email address one more time, because I think you got it wrong.
Did I? Nick, Nick Wilbur, Wilbur at evr.solutions.
Yeah.
Did I add a dot? Yeah, I added a dot. That's how you know I'm just sitting in here drinking all this information in.
Steve, go ahead.
All right.
What do you got there, Steve?
I appreciate you guys, and it's just fun to be able to be in this format where we can just chill and talk trucks. And yeah, I would agree. If someone needs to get a hold of me, they can get a hold of me through the website. There's a contact. Email me, and I'm more than happy to talk to them. So yeah, enjoy this. Thanks, guys. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Be safe.